Bonjour mes amis, il fait beau aujourd'hui, le café est encore ouvert et ça veut dire salut. So let's take a trip, hop on the ferry and pop across to the island of Sodom. The engines had invented a new game, it was called Shaps. It was, as you might imagine, a fairly simple game. You had 2 packs of cards. One pack had pictures of the same man on them, but each with a different name printed on the bottom. On the bottom of the card, explained Edward, not on man's bottom, obviously. These were the identity cards. The second pack each represented a different job. These were the job cards. All you had to do was dole out the cards from each pack, and when the identity and the job cards matched, shout, Shaps. But let's get on with the story. Thomas was intrigued, or at least curious. I'm curious, he said. Edward sighed. When Thomas was curious, he knew that it was going to be a long day. Curiosity may well have killed the cat, but it didn't have the same effect on Thomas, and the great scrapyard in the sky was a long way off, no matter how many silly questions he asked. As it was, Edward summoned up his patience, dug out his metaphorical crayons and asked, "What is it this time?" "It's Mr Rishi," said Thomas. "All those trips in private jets and helicopters must cost him a fortune." Edward was exasperated. This was the 3rd time that he'd had to tell Thomas that the jets and helicopters were paid for by the people of the island of Sodom. They were not paid for by Mr Rishi or his family. And in truth, in one way or another, the people of Sodom paid quite a lot to Mr Rishi and his family, although allegedly due to an unfortunate error in awarding the contracts, not for the jets or helicopters. Heads would undoubtedly roll. Thomas continued, "And why does he insist on using them? He could get anywhere by train." Edward decided it was time to tell Thomas a little story. Once upon a time on the island of Sodom, a young and ambitious man named Rishi rose to prominence. He was known to be good with money, and soon found himself in charge of the railway's finances. Now, over the past 13 years or so, the railway had been victim of a series of really incompetent controllers. One, a lady controller, not the one with the handbag, had even managed to bankrupt the island overnight. Enter Mr Rishi. He was soon voted in as the latest in this line. "Who voted for him?" asked Thomas. "Not the people of Sodom," said James. "Just the people in the big house," said Henry. Sodom all?" asked Thomas. "Exactly," said Percy. "Sodom all." It's true that over the years, and so far as the people in the big house were concerned, the people of the island had become an irrelevance. Every 5 years or so they were given the opportunity to vote for a new board of directors, but in reality they were only offered a choice between the various puppets chosen by the oligarchs. The people, of course, having been dumbed down by the popular press and things like Love Island, were generally too stupid to see this. "I like Love Island," said Thomas, "and I haven't been dumbed down." "That's true," said Henry. "You're just as dumb as you ever were." Edward went on. Having ascended to the dizzy heights of controller, Mr Rishi began to realise the importance of his work. He was an important man, above the normal restraints of probity. Thomas chipped in. "My driver says his daughter's going through probity, and she's developed acne." Edward wasn't even going to go there. He just continued. Having ascended to the dizzy heights of controller, he made the decision to utilise private jets and helicopters for travel. Now, whispers of his use of private transportation began to circulate, and the media and the public grew curious about his choices. Now, Mr Rishi, being a transparent and accountable controller, understood the need to address their concerns, so he decided to explain, and he held a press conference. A press conference?" asked Thomas. It means he spoke to the newspapers, said James. Thomas was still puzzled. Can you talk to the newspapers? He asked. I mean, I pull the train that delivers the newspapers all around the island, but I've never seen anyone actually talk to them. Well, no one except that old porter at Oakworth Station. He said something when he dropped a particularly heavy bundle of papers on his foot. But that was only a couple of words, and they were largely unrepeatable. And another thing, if you spoke to the newspapers, would they hear you? Would they answer back? Could you have a conversation? Henry decided that Thomas might actually have been dumbed down by Low Island. Is it just me, or has he hit a new low? He said. Edward went on with his story. During the press conference, Mr Rishi explained, my use of private transportation is solely for official business that requires immediate attention and time-sensitive travel. These modes of transportation allow me to efficiently reach various parts of the island and even go abroad when necessary. It ensures that I can address matters in a timely manner. He went on to say that his use of private jets and helicopters was not a lavish indulgence, but rather a necessity given the demanding nature of his role, and by utilising these means of travel he could maximise his time and fulfil his duties more effectively. He recognised the environmental concerns associated with private transportation, and he assured the public that he was taking steps to mitigate his carbon footprint, and he pledged to offset his travels by contributing to green initiatives and actively supporting environmentally friendly policies. To ensure transparency, he promised to provide detailed reports on the purpose and frequency of his private flights. By doing so, he aimed to foster trust with the public and hold himself accountable for his actions. Over time, his use of private jets and helicopters became accepted by the people and was seen as a way of upholding his commitment to efficient and effective governance. The public began to understand that his choice to utilise these modes of travel was not driven by personal extravagance, but rather by a dedication to serving the island with the utmost efficiency. If you tell a lie often enough, it becomes the truth, said James. In the end, his use of private jets and helicopters proved to be a calculated decision driven by the demands of his role. Through his transparency, dedication and responsibility, he became the most respected controller since the lady with the handbag. And he worked diligently to shape a brighter future for all. That's a fairy story, said Henry. It's a load of bollocks, said Percy.